Hello, everyone. Good evening. How are we doing today? Hope we're doing pretty good. Hope we're doing pretty good. All right. So I'm gonna jump right in. Running a little bit behind, but that's okay. Still have a couple people that are on their way in, but we're gonna just go for it. So I'm Justin Nazario, and this is one of my newer streams, but we're going to be talking about writing rhetorical analysis thesis statements. I know rhetorical analysis is one of the first types of essays that you learn how to do in AP Lang, and compared to some other essays that you might have written in your English classes or some of your other classes, the rhetorical analysis is like easily the newest one. The form of rhetorical analysis is very different than any other essay you've ever written before because you're analyzing what you see on the page and how it serves a purpose and the way we read it and the way we interpret it. So it can be a little difficult, but this stream is going to be all about how do you write a thesis statement. When you're reading rhetorical analysis, what should you dissect, and then how do you create it and you make your own voice regarding the strategies used, such as literary devices, rhetoric, things like that. So before we begin, be sure to follow Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. On YouTube, we do have some promotional videos going up, some review guides. Twitter, Instagram, we're interacting with everyone on there. We have some little review sheets that we send out for some other courses, such as AP World, AP Chemistry. So just be sure to follow us, and you'll also get notifications of when all our streams are. Speaking of streams, if you're interested in some other streams that we have coming up for AP Lang, you can take a look here. We have Rhetorical Analysis Organization and Timing on the 15th with Catherine Howard. On the 16th, we have Improving Your Multiple Choice Scores with Stephanie Kirk. She's going to be teaching you some techniques and things to look out for when you're answering multiple choice questions and how you should read stimulus passages in response to those questions. And then on the 21st, we have What's Worth Analyzing with Brandon Wu. That's going to kind of go with what I'm talking about today, which is what is worth analyzing in rhetorical analysis, and then how do you write a clear claim in response to what you're reading. All right, so here's what we're going to go over. Here's like our live stream agenda. We're going to be going over the basic format of thesis statements, obviously, giving you some recommendations about what I think would best serve you when it comes to writing your rhetorical analysis, deciding what to include in the thesis, things that you're going to want to mention, or things that you might want to avoid, or things that maybe you should be a little cautious of mentioning. Telling you how to show and to tell, but not one over the other. In writing in general, especially in the AP language course, it's very important that you find that balance because you don't want to over explain, but you don't want to under explain. You don't want to oversimplify your claim, but you don't want to over exaggerate your claim. It's about finding a nice balance between those in your essays. And then we have correlating your thesis with the rest of your essay. A lot of people do struggle with writing a thesis statement and then making sure that it relates to the rest of their essay. We'll be talking about it later on, but your thesis is pretty much it's like your guide almost. It's like guiding your reader and your audience through what you're going to be talking about in your essay. So you don't want to talk about something in your thesis and then never hear about it again. So we'll be going through things like that, some tips and stuff to help you stay on track and how to make your essay a little bit more readable and how to use your thesis statement as like a preface to your claims and what you're going to be talking about. All right, so this is our first slide. So we're going to be talking about the basic format of thesis statements. And in bold here, I have a good thesis statement asserts your claim at the author's use of rhetorical devices and guides your reader through your justifications. That is pretty much how your thesis should be when you are responding to it. Like I said, it's that roadmap. You're going to be guiding your reader through, here's what I'm going to be talking about. Here are the reasons why I'm right, and here are the reasons why you will think I'm right too at the end. Just like the author is using literary devices, you as the writer in the essay can also employ the same strategies. So here's some other things, some tips to consider when you're writing your thesis. Be specific. This is a big thing that a lot of people, when it comes to writing rhetorical analysis, sometimes tend to overlook, but you don't really have the time or the tools at your disposal for the most big and generalized open thesis in the world. For those of you who don't know, an open thesis is uh, a thesis that instead of saying use of metaphor or simile, would say use of complex literary devices. It kind of broadens what you can talk about, but it can also kind of confuse your reader if you don't specify. So that's kind of why I have be specific there, because you don't want to confuse yourself, you don't want to confuse your reader. It just makes everyone on the same page when you specify right off the bat what you're going to talk about. So, when I was taking AP Lang, I was very, very specific about what I wanted to talk about. And then, even later on, if you forget what you're mentioning, you can just look back and you know exactly what you were talking about. Consider sophistication. Um, especially for rhetorical analysis, you will kind of be assessed on your ability to kind of include things from the author, evidence from the text, being able to justify what you're saying about what the author has written. It's more than just saying something and then leaving it in there. You have to be able to find some backing behind it, and then state what devices the author uses. Obviously, that kind of goes with the first one about being specific. You don't want to kind of leave it up in the air where it's impossible for the reader to almost guess what you're going to talk about. You want to be sure right off the bat, here's what we're talking about, and I'm going to tell you why in the next couple of paragraphs I think so. Some things that you should be cautious of doing, and as I said before, being bland and generalizing, it doesn't really help anyone. It really benefits you to kind of stay in your own guidelines, and that thesis kind of sets that parameter for you about here's what I'm going to talk about, here's where I'm maybe going to draw the line because I don't want to, I don't want to go off on a tangent, lose some time, and then summarizing the sources. The readers are experts in the stimulus passages that you are reading. They have read them in and out. They've probably read hundreds of essays before yours. They know what the piece is about. So don't spend so much time explaining to them the plot of what happened. I mean, if you're going to be talking about how the plot is symbolic of something else that has happened, be it in society, in another story, in real life, then you just have to be able to have the backing for it. But just kind of guiding the reader through here's the story and then here's what happened doesn't really mention it all that much. Is it bad to mention two generally ethos, pathos, and logos? um that's a good question. It is not too bad, but you just have to be very cautious about when you're using it, because if those appeal to emotion, if those appeals to logic are not very obvious or you're not able to defend them correctly, you could get penalized a little bit for it. I think your question is very interesting because those are things that some teachers will tell you not to use at all, and then some will tell you to use with caution. If I could give you a recommendation, I would say if the piece lends itself more towards either one of those, then by all means, be sure you have the backing for it. However, be sure to look for other devices first, and then if you're talking about metaphor, kind of incorporate how maybe the metaphor is an appeal to one of those. That way, it's not really much of a talking point, and it's more of evidence for another claim that you have. But that's a good question. Thank you, Matthew. And yeah, and when I say don't explain what you are talking about, it's more about don't just say, in this essay, we're going to be talking about similes and metaphors and uh, Bob Vance. You just jump right in, because you want to pace yourself for time, and then you want to be sure that you're doing everything in your power to stay on task and make sure that you're staying nice and, you know, answering the prompts in the amount of time that you have. Will you post the slides for us to look at later? With Fiveable, we do have Fiveable Plus, which for a small fee, you actually get this entire stream as a little replay, and you'll hear my commentary. And if you need to, you can mute me and you can just look at the slides. But if you need me at any point throughout the live stream to go back to a slide for you and explain something, just ask a question. I have no problem going back. We're going to have some free time at the end also. So if you have any other questions or need me to go back, just let me know. Feel free to take notes or take any pictures if you need to. Just let me know and I'll accommodate for that. All right. So when I was making this, I kind of thought it was pointless for me to tell you what a good thesis is. So I kind of wanted to give you some examples. So The theses that I'm talking about here are from this book. It's called Hillbilly Elegy, and it's a book by J.D. Vance. And pretty much what it talks about is about it's about this middle class family, and it's a memoir. And he's talking about things that he went through being middle class, and how, especially in the Midwestern United States, that the middle class is kind of declining. So that's kind of to give you some background for these theses here, so that way it doesn't catch you by surprise. So before I read these, though, remember, if there's anything to consider for your thesis, it's to be specific and to remember that you are guiding your reader through your essay. So, thesis that needs improvement. Vance uses personal stories and tone to show how the negative effects of poverty, in the United States. Now, this is not at any means a bad thesis statement. In fact, people could get away with using this one. It's just when you're considering sophistication and the way that you want to present your argument in a very professional and a very developed way, there's a way to reword it that makes it sound a little bit different. So now, when I read you the second thesis statement, look out for intricacy and complexity in the argument. Through his use of extensive anecdotes and appropriate tonal shifts, Vance employs a powerful argument regarding the overwhelming nature of middle class poverty in the Midwestern United States following the 2008 stock market crash. If you compare the two, one kind of does provide background, and it acts more as a preface versus one that just kind of serves as like, here's what the reader or the author did. The one that needs improvement is often what people will write when they're a little pressured for time, and then the one when it comes with a good thesis statement. Uh, that is when people, usually for people that have a little bit more planning under their belt, which is something I'll go into in a moment about how planning will make or break your essay and how to appropriately plan, especially for your thesis statement. But before that, here is another example. Now, this book is East of Eden by John Steinbeck, which I don't have with me. But here's the thesis that needs improvement regarding the book. Steinbeck's story revolves around cause and effect structure that leads to an epic conclusion. When it comes to cause and effect, you have to be very careful in the way that you use it, because what you may interpret as cause and effect might not exactly be cause and effect, but if you can justify it, as always, with complexity and proper elaboration, and if it's consistent throughout the entire piece, of course, you will get the point for it. However, cause and effect is a very iffy sort of device to use, because many authors, while some intentionally do it, some also, it's not the main device. And sometimes cause and effect acts more as a result of other literary devices. So, in general, cause and effect is not the strongest device to use, but in East of Eden, it's a very prevalent literary device. It all depends on what the piece you're reading. But here's that same thesis kind of reworded and changed a little bit. Steinbeck's use of cause and effect narration instills a sense of suspension within the reader, in conjunction with biblical diction that makes the reader reminisce about their past alongside the protagonists, Cain and Abel. So it's similar to the one before. It incorporates more of the actual story, and it's not just dropping facts, and it's kind of incorporating the reader. And I think that's very important when you're writing your essays, because you want to have that that very intelligent sound to you. You want to sound like you read the piece and you are a professional. It makes a good impression for your reader, and it shows that you are actually paying attention. You were picking up on things that maybe the person sitting next to you might not have picked up on. And sometimes that's all the difference it makes, the way you word stuff and how you introduce things. So one more example here. So here's another thesis statement that needs improvement. I personally disagree with the narrator's use of simile and metaphor throughout the piece, as it indicates weak writing and prose style. And then I'll just read it right off the slide. Stay clear of voicing opinions in your essay. Rhetorical analysis is not like your synthesis, and it's not like your argumentative. You have to be very cautious about the way that you word things, because if you are presenting more of an argument and you're using the piece, or the prose rather, as a reason to boost your argument that an author is, maybe the piece was bad or it was poorly written, you can very, very easily lose a devastating amount of points on your essay. Rhetorical analysis is the impartial essay, as I like to call it. You are just simply putting aside your beliefs and you're just analyzing what you're reading and what you're seeing. Um, and even here, not developing an argument in response to the stimulus. Keep your claims related to the work and also answer the question completely. It's every now and then it is okay to have an opinion. Like, for instance, if you say that maybe if you're contrasting two characters, maybe you could say, like, the weak-minded uh, or perseverant character A contrasts that of strong and confident character B. It's instilling an opinion, but it represents the text. So you just have to be very cautious of when you use words that could imply that you're maybe injecting an argument, because you don't want to obviously get caught off for doing that when you didn't really mean it. So just got to be cautious of that. So what should I include in my thesis? Devices that are present in the beginning, middle, and end of the work. And I should have bolded this, but if you're if the device that you're looking for is consistent in all three parts of the story, beginning, middle, and end, the likelihood of you getting a higher score is much higher. And this is simply because you'll have more to work with. The College Board doesn't want to see you only citing the first two paragraphs of the essay, or the story rather. They want to see, how does the author introduce that device, and then how is it continued through the rest of the story. If you only like just drop stuff from a certain part of the essay, you're kind of constraining yourself, and it makes it very difficult to prove it right or wrong. If you have more to work with and you have more to build out and you have more to give to the reader, that is sometimes all the difference. And you just want to address the author's overarching theme. Sorry. It all just serves to benefit you by using a wide range of pieces and things that represent the whole plot, because then it gives you more to work with. And it's all about saving yourself some time. And if you address right from the very beginning, before you even open the booklet, I am I am going to pick something that is present in all three parts of the prose, and I will be looking for it on my first read through. When you open the book and as you're reading through it, it'll save you so much time. It'll save you so much time. But if you have questions about recognizing literary devices, feel free to drop them in the chat, or check out another live stream I did about a couple weeks ago. And that one was all about recognizing literary devices. So they kind of build off of each other, because your thesis, when the best advice I could give is, when you're reading the story for the first time, be on the lookout for how you can develop your thesis. What is overwhelmingly obvious? And there's typically, in some pieces, there's some that is very obvious. Like, we're going to actually write a thesis towards the end. We're going to be going through the piece and we're going to be identifying, here's where this begins, here's where this begins, and here's where this begins. But you'll see then it's all about making your life easier and making all that stress and anxiety kind of wash right off of you as you're reading the piece, and you're realizing, I am prepared and I know what to be on the lookout for. So another part is not all showing and not all telling. As I mentioned before, you want to remember sophistication, and finding a good balance between showing and telling is very difficult. It As I mentioned before, your readers are experts in what it is that they are assessing you on. So you don't want to spend so much time explaining to them the plot or who the characters are, their relationships, because frankly, they already know. You want to spend more time explaining the intricacies of those relationships, showing, and then telling. So, for instance, if you're analyzing, let's say, Toy Story, you could start off by saying that Andy is a young boy who has developed a relationship with uh, his toys through fictional imagination. And then by telling, you can explain, however, this relationship is a lot deeper than he thinks it is, as his toys actually have minds of their own. Without him knowing, they, in their own right, are developing a relationship that is one sided. That is the elaboration. I consider show, introducing, telling, elaborating on what it is you introduced. And they go hand in hand. And that all goes with planning out your essay. Where do I need to spend more time talking? What is it that I need to focus on more? There's going to be some parts in your essay where you simply drop the evidence, two sentences of elaboration, and that's it. There are some devices that are very prevalent and then they just kind of stop. And that's just not that's the way it is. It's just some pieces don't rely on that many literary devices. Um, so if you're trying to prove a point that imagery is very important in a piece that is describing the way, like it's a checklist on how to, I don't know, age wood, you're gonna have to maybe go a little bit further in your explanation. That doesn't mean it's wrong necessarily. As I mentioned before, there's no right or wrong answer to a rhetorical analysis if you can properly justify your claims. Um, so just keep that in mind that what you're thinking, probably when you're reading it, is probably correct. You just have to be able to dissect the information and the evidence that will prove that you are correct. And then consequently, how do I show it? And how do I tell it to the reader? So I know we already talked about it, but I wanted to go over this one more time and kind of show where the showing ends and the telling begins. Now, this kind of is flipped around just a little bit for the second one. So the thesis that needs improvement, this one I kind of flipped around. It says, poverty in the United States is bad. Not having a lot of money is bad for both individuals and their families. In Vance's essay, he uses a variety of literary devices to show how poverty in the Midwestern United States is bad. This is an example of an open thesis, like I mentioned before, just stating he uses a variety of literary devices. It's not specific. And then if you look at the good thesis statement, it specifies, anecdotes and tonal shifts, and, it's a little bit more showing. Your argument just naturally develops in its intensity and its strength overall when you take it upon yourself to show everything. So if we're taking the good thesis statement, through his use of extensive anecdotes and appropriate tonal shifts, that is the showing. Telling is then what he does with them. Vance employs a powerful argument regarding the overwhelming nature of middle class poverty. Um, like I mentioned, the showing is you introducing, and then the telling is you elaborating. What is it showing? What is it doing? Rather, how does what the author is saying and how is what I'm picking up on right? And how do I prove to you that it's right? It's kind of like if you got into a debate with someone and they're just claiming something that is not real, like saying that, like guinea pigs don't exist. It's very obvious that guinea pigs exist. There is science and there's pictures of them. There's stories about them like they are real creatures. But then if they show you that maybe they're not real and maybe they're just dog hybrids and they have science about it, they're explaining to you why. And that's kind of not that the rhetorical analysis is proving guinea pigs aren't real. It's kind of in that same right showing you that the showing and like telling is they kind of go hand in hand. I would like to read that essay. I would like to read that essay too. People, when it comes to rhetorical analysis, they kind of do reach like that, but you'd be surprised. Like, some people really know how to develop an argument, which kind of goes back to the thing I mentioned before. You can't be right or wrong. I mean, granted, there's some things that are a little easier to write about, which you might consider right, or maybe things that are a little bit more difficult to prove, which you might consider wrong. But it all just goes back to how well are you able to defend what it is you're saying is right. So that's kind of all I have to say for showing and telling. It's kind of something that you also pick up on as you just naturally go through the class and as you read more. I'm sure you'll definitely be able to decipher and tell the two apart. It's just a matter of becoming familiar with the way that the essay is written and the stimulus passages are. So correlating your thesis with your essay. Um, when I read essays, it's very interesting to see how people in their thesis will become very specific. And then later on in their essay, it just dissolves. And what they mentioned in their thesis is virtually non existent or it doesn't come up again. Um, First off, and this is the only way really to pass the AP exam, you must respond to the prompt in its entirety. you get awarded points simply for responding to the prompt correctly. Um, if you consider every part of the prompt as its own little entity that you need to respond to, and you naturally weave that into your body paragraphs and thesis, you're hitting all of the cylinders, and that's how you want it to be. But if you're focusing on one part of the thesis, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice, and it only hurts you in the end when you don't read through the question all the way. Read through the question all the way. A lot of people overlook that also. That entire italicized section is to help you and tell you what College Board wants you to write about. So be sure that whatever they're giving you is serving a purpose, and that what you might not think could help you exactly when you need it, like need it to help you. The points mentioned in the thesis should have their own points, and that doesn't make sense. But if you have, if you go back to J.D. Vance, and we're talking about extensive anecdotes and tonal shifts. Now that I have anecdotes and tonal shifts, I have to say, under anecdotes, I'll say maybe one of him playing baseball, another one of him getting into a car crash, another one of him maybe going to school with unwashed clothes. Those are, it's kind of like your points beneath your points. And if we're talking about tonal shifts, say halfway through the essay, he starts employing more terse diction. Maybe he starts using more howevers or buts or thens and ands and afters, and then maybe explain maybe how the way he's interacting with the other characters is different. It's all about making sure that your evidence is plentiful and that you don't run out of things to talk about. Um, the sophistication obviously needs to be consistent throughout. You don't want to have a beautiful first paragraph that is the angels are singing and everything is coming together in the universe, and then your second body paragraph, because you spent 45 minutes on the first one, is just word vomit. You want to divide your time, and you want to make sure that each paragraph blends seamlessly into the other, and kind of act as if you're taking your reader for a nice little a little ride on like a Disney little boat ride. You don't want the boat ride to be super bumpy. You're going to want it to blend from scene to scene nicely. So consider that when you're writing it, if it gets a little convoluted, that you might want to take a step back. Um, And sophistication does not always mean super long paragraphs. It just means making connections. And that's what College Board wants to see. They want to see that your points are blending together, and that your thesis and your body paragraphs and your conclusions and your anecdotes and your evidence, and they all come together to prove your thesis, and they prove your claims, and they respond to the question. Mention other devices and other ways the author uses rhetoric. This is entirely optional. Um, what you mentioned in your thesis could be all you talk about. If I'm only talking about anecdotes and tonal shifts, then I don't have to mention simile. I don't have to mention juxtaposition, Bildungsroman, or double entendre. I can just choose to focus on those two things. But when you incorporate other devices, it kind of it increases the sophistication of your argument, but it also shows that your argument is a little bit more complex than maybe what your reader is expecting. Um, as I mentioned, it's entirely optional, and if you are a little pressed for time, I wouldn't recommend bothering about it. But it even helps you to reinforce that what you're talking about is correct, because you're like, oh, okay. His anecdotes are supported by extended metaphors that are consistent throughout the book, which kind of indicate tonal shifts. Maybe he stops using them halfway through the story when he starts introducing new words, or his diction gets a little darker, or maybe the imagery gets a little darker. So they go hand in hand. And then the specificity should be consistent throughout. I already mentioned that. Be sure that you're dividing and conquering all of your time correctly. You don't want to spend too much time on one part and then not enough time on the other, so your essay is a little bit wonky. Make sure that you're planning accordingly. All right. So now we are going to go over how I would kind of read this. So I call this the what, how, why technique. And these are some questions that asking yourself when you're reading can very much serve to benefit you in writing your thesis. So ask yourself, what is the author saying? This is a very basic comprehension technique. It's saying, what is the author making a claim about? Do I understand what it is that they're talking about? Is their argument easy to read? Is it hard to read? Do I understand? And then you have, how are they saying it? Are they using extreme images? Are they being very direct? Are they completely ignoring the show and only telling? Are they only showing and not telling? And then why are they saying it? And this connects to the so what of your rhetorical analysis. And it's kind of the overarching theme. Why is the author writing it? All literature is written for a purpose, but why are you here right now? Why are you sitting in the seat reading it, answering a question on it for a big educational organization? You have to kind of realize that the piece has survived the test of time, and there's a reason why the author wrote that what they wrote, and why you're still reading it today. So making those connections in your mind between what you're reading and maybe stuff going on in real life in society, it kind of increases your interaction with the piece. So I'm going to read this, but I'm not going to read the italicized section because I only want us to focus on the devices. And then I'm going to read the prompt, and then we're going to go through it together. So this is from last exam before the course was remade, pretty much, but it still serves a great purpose. I love this letter. So we're going to take it paragraph by paragraph. First paragraph. I know that in embarking on nonviolence, I shall be running what might fairly be termed a mad risk. But the victories of truth have never been won without risks, often of the gravest character. Conversion of a nation that has consciously or unconsciously preyed upon another, far more numerous, far more ancient, and no less cultured than itself, is worth any amount of risk. So, right off the bat, I see a repetition in the sentences that are kind of reinforcing a sense of, like, like he's fed up. The author is kind of fed up with the treatment of his country. I see words such as victories and risks and far more, and ancient and numerous, and this juxtaposition of consciously and unconsciously. It it shows anger through the way that it's read, even though I was reading it kind of monotonously. Um, it naturally implies that the author is a little aggravated. So if I had to answer the how are they saying it, for instance, I could mention repetition. They're saying it through repetition. They're contrasting unconscious and conscious, the victories that come with risks, the defeats that come with risks, and how the author taking a risk is one of those victories. Paragraph 2. I have deliberately used the word conversion, for my ambition is no less than to convert the British people through nonviolence, and thus to make them see the wrong they have done to India. I do not seek to harm your people. I want to serve them even as I want to serve my own. I believe that I have always served them. So once again, we see this repetition regarding the word serve and nonviolence. This is I love the second paragraph because we finally see the author introduce the I. In the first paragraph, we have the author introducing why they are doing it and what it stands for. But in the second paragraph, we have the I. We have them saying, I am embarking on nonviolence because I want to deal with the oppression and violence that India is dealing with through nonviolence, create a level platform for peace and understanding and consciousness and realization. And this contrast once more in the juxtaposition between um, I do not seek to harm your people. I want to serve them even as I want to serve my own. And then even saying, and thus make them see the wrong they have done to India. It kind of flips the essay on its head. And it's pretty much saying that the author is using the reality versus the idealization, what the author sees versus what the author wants to kind of show where the essay is going. So now this kind of answers the why, and it shows that the author wants to do this to change a group of people. So we can assume that the audience of this letter is the people he is trying to change because he is referring to them, your people and my people. Your people, my people. Incorporating the audience is kind of giving us an indicator of why it was being written. The third and final paragraph. I served them up to 1919 blindly. But when my eyes were opened and I conceived non-cooperation, the object was still to serve them. I employed the same weapon that I have, in all humility, successfully used against the dearest members of my family. If I have equal love for your people with mine, it will not long remain hidden. It will be acknowledged by them, even as the members of my family acknowledged, after they had tried me for several years. If the people join me, as I expect they will, the sufferings they will undergo, unless the British nation sooner retraces its steps, will be enough to melt the stoniest hearts. So, once again, that juxtaposition, contrasting between juxtaposition and repetition. My family, as my family did, as my family will. And then I really enjoy how the author builds off of this extended metaphor of this idea of peace. When it goes from, I employed the same weapon that I have in all humility successfully used against the dearest members of my family, all the way to the last sentence of the paragraph. It's just building off of it. It's like it's just expanding the idea. And that kind of answers the what. And it answers that the author is saying that nonviolence is the way to deal with problems between rivaling nations and rivaling peoples, people who don't understand each other and people who, might not get along and people who don't have the best history together. So, right off in those three paragraphs, we've kind of answered the what, how, and why. So now let's kind of put it in terms of a thesis statement. So if I had to pick my top two from my top two devices from these pieces, like from the three paragraphs that we've already read, what would you guys think we would pick? Would we pick like repetition or contrast, juxtaposition, maybe imagery, metaphor? So tell me what some of the things that you guys would use. If you guys were in the middle of the AP exam and you've read these three paragraphs, what would you guys consider using? Using what refers to what devices would you pick for your thesis statement? Using in your thesis to talk about for the rest of your essay. So, what devices are consistent through all three paragraphs? And then like, which two would you pick for your thesis and for your essay? Is there a certain number of devices you should use in an essay? I think that is a good question. I don't think there is a limit to the amount that you can use, but for the constraints of time, I think you should limit yourself to two, three if absolutely needed. Um, I think two allows you to properly build it out correctly and it lets you support it properly. Because if you have too many, like if we're using all the ones I mentioned, repetition, juxtaposition, contrast, and then some others that might not fit in, Bildungsroman, double entendre, extended metaphor, then you have to provide evidence for all of those and you'll definitely run out of time. So, Autumn, if I could give you a recommendation, I think your top two would make it a lot easier for you to defend and a lot easier for your reader to follow. So juxtaposition, I definitely agree with that one. I think that is one of the most consistent ones throughout the three paragraphs. And remember, this is a whole piece. So this is only three paragraphs that we've read. So even though I'm asking you to consider it as an entire piece, this is just the beginning. If the author in the next middle section completely ditched the juxtaposition and decides to take on simile, then we're going to have to reconsider juxtaposition. But I think right now, juxtaposition is one of the best ones to go with. And then I would even go with repetition as well. I would say the author employs the literary devices of juxtaposition and repetition in order to make an appeal to humanity in a fight against oppression. Something along those lines. Connecting your show with your tell, larger context. Very good. Thank you, guys. All right, so now that we're at the end of the stream, I was just curious if anyone has any other questions, if anyone needs me to go back and explain anything they want to comment on, even if it's not related to rhetorical analysis and it's AP Lang in general. Um, I'm going to be around for as long as you guys need me to be around. Just drop some questions down below. But other than that, we are all done for tonight. And if no one has any questions, then you guys are able to go on and leave. But like I said, I'll be around in case anyone has anything. When you are rhetorically analyzing an essay, should the thesis have a slight argument to it? Um, when you're in a way, yes. Just by nature, the rhetorical analysis calls you to make your own argument because you're saying these are the two most pivotal literary devices. And it's kind of assuming that the other ones are not as important. But in a way, yes, but in a way, no. Just be careful that if you are adding any sort of argument, that it relates strictly to the prose. And you're not saying that I disagree with the author of the passage, that it is not nonviolence that is needed. Things like that are not that you'll get points off because, like as I mentioned before, the rhetorical analysis is supposed to be impartial, but your pieces and the things that you use do naturally have one in it. So I think a slight argument, yes, but just be careful that you're not writing a argumentative essay, obviously. You are very welcome, Matthew. Thank you for asking questions. I appreciate it. All right. Well, if no one has any other questions, then I'm going to kind of leave it here. Once again, be sure to follow us on our social media. Oh, actually, we have one more question. What are the best ways to look for rhetorical devices in a passage? Sometimes when the essay is older, I find it harder to identify the devices. This is a very interesting question because in older essays, it actually is much more difficult to find those devices. I think my best recommendation to you would be to, I'm sure your teachers have given you those long list of literary devices. Just be sure that you know what each one is, and kind of, if you're making note cards, for example, it helps to write down the definition, but then also to have an example of it. So, for instance, Bildungsroman is the definition is a story that starts in the beginning of a uh oh, not Bildungsroman. Um it's another literary device, but just making sure that you know what the device is and the example of it. A Bildungsroman is a coming of age novel, so I'm mixing it up with something else. But uh, Bildungsroman, for instance, if you want to use it as a coming of age novel, your example could be something maybe along the lines of you could say the Harry Potter series, maybe how Harry Potter is at the beginning of the first book versus the end. How has he kind of grown as a character? And then maybe if you want to analyze one book in the series, how has he changed at the start of the book versus at the end, especially the first book, the way Harry Potter was before he went to Hogwarts versus after, and then the next book, it's just, you know. So but when it comes to older essays, a lot of my teacher called them old dead writers. They use a lot of similar messages, such as like metaphor, images, and they love diction. They love using tone in diction. They they love it. So if I had to give you a suggestion, Ashna, it would be just know your definitions and then make sure that you have some examples to refer to later on, and then you'll be able to kind of recognize them later. Of course. How do you make sure to get commentary points without veering on the edge of argumentative? Would that just be through analyzing? Yes. Your defending your claims would be through your analyzation. Part of the reason why I mentioned things that you want to have consistent throughout your entire piece is because um, if we're going back to the guinea pig thing, if you only cite one essay that says guinea pigs aren't real, you're not really convincing me. But if you have an essay here, an article there, a book there, a novel there, a podcast here, and then you kind of present them to me, I can't deny facts from multiple sources. And if translating that to your rhetorical analysis, it's very difficult to say that you're wrong when you have something from the beginning of the essay, from the end of the essay, from the middle of the essay. Your analyzation and the way that you kind of twist what the author is saying and what it implies to fit what you are saying is how you kind of create your argument. Um, how do you make sure to get commentary points without veering on the edge of argumentative? To answer that question, I would make sure that you're keeping your analyzation and your commentary on the piece strictly related to what is on the page. You don't want to say, like, let's say the author is born in 1928, and then you're like, the author must have written this because of the Great Depression. The, that if it doesn't, if the author is writing a piece about the Great Depression, then you can mention that. But if an author born in 1928 is writing not born, if the essay is published in 1928 and then talking about like lizard species in Latin America, and then you mention that this must have been written in spite of the Great Depression, you're gonna get points off because then you're making an argument that there's no like basis behind it. So exactly as you said, through analyzing is how you prove your point, and that's how you present your commentary. So that was a really good question. Wow. Of course. If we have a strong historical background, can we use our knowledge to support a claim when it relates to the why? Um, this is not going to be the best answer, and it's an answer I did not like when I was taking the class, and it is no. If it's mentioned in the piece, you can only present historical information as far as the piece mentions, because if the piece is talking about lizard species in Latin America and then you conveniently happen to know 105 species but the essay only mentions 104, you could get points off for mentioning something else beyond the stimulus. um, I know it sucks, and I have a strong historical background also because I was taking AP World at the time. So, for those of you who didn't know, the piece that we looked at was by Gandhi, and it was written in response to Lord Irwin. And I really badly wanted to mention like the Workers' Rebellion, but I had to remind myself like have to stay within the confines, cannot talk beyond what is on the page. So to answer your question, you cannot, but if it is mentioned in the essay, you can mention it and you can weave it into your analyzation and be extra sophisticated. So, good question, Lena. Would it be best to embed quotes and evidence in your paragraph? Does this show more sophistication? Yes, it does. The only way, personally, I think the only way to introduce quotes and things like that is to embed them because your argument could be let's say you have a very interesting argument. Instead of saying repetition and juxtaposition, let's say maybe you say that it is personification. And the reader is reading your essay and it's like, okay, and then they flip the page and it's just if you have like a sentence and then you have the quote and then you have another sentence and you have another quote and you're not really elaborating on you're not really boosting your argument. So yes, it does show more sophistication, and as you go through your course and as you write more essays, it'll naturally become a standard that will translate beyond AP Lang. Like I'm taking a research class right now, and I still find myself embedding quotes. It just naturally shows a better analyzation process, and it shows that you are completely understanding. You're answering the what, how, why. So that was another good question. But yes, do your best to break away from formulaic writing that you might have been taught in reading class and kind of just write as if you're having a conversation. That was the best piece of advice that my AP Lang teacher gave me, right as if you're having a conversation. And that made all the difference. Um, it changes the way that you write and it changes the way that you introduce things because then you'll take it down where needed and you'll take it up where needed. But yes, embedding quotes and evidence should be your golden standard. Mhm. Any other questions? Does anyone have any last minute thoughts, maybe last minute things they want me to go over? You're very welcome, Ashna. Thank you for asking so many questions. I appreciate everyone being very engaged tonight. All right. Well, if that's it, then I'm going to sign off for the night. As I mentioned, be sure to follow us on our social media. And if you have any other questions, you can be sure to leave them on our Twitter or our Instagram. And if you have any other questions, we have an amazing Fiveable community on Discord. You can be sure to join and ask questions, and there will be tons of people being able to run and help you guys out. So I hope everyone has a good night. Thank you guys for dropping in. Best of luck for the rest of this month and the rest of the school year. You guys got this. Just relax, trust your teachers, trust the process, trust Fiveable, and you guys will be all set for the AP exam. I promise. Be sure to tune in for some of the other streams we have to be more prepared, and I will see you guys in the next live stream. Thank you guys. Have a good one.